Welcome back to Old War Stories with Uncle Jay. Oh, it's been a long time since I recorded one of these. Really busy summer. We are currently right in first to even second week of September now, and we finally are actually having a really hot day. The Galileo thermometer is reading 95. That's pretty impressive. Definitely got just a couple days left of this before it turns cooler and then gets into all that bad stuff that we know of as Octember. Anyways, this one is called My Old Computers Over the Years. I recently put up a series, not recently as far as when you're seeing this, but recently in terms of when it was actually recorded in relation to today. The computer out here died. The computer in my office died, and the screen on the digital picture frame machine died, and had a lot of comments going back and forth on that video series. Links in the prescription, of course. So this has been on my mind, and it's something I've been wanting to tell. So my old computers over the years, 1984, I think it was. Could have been 83. I can't remember precisely. It was either 83 or 84. It was like December. My father worked for IBM for many, many, many years. And back in, was it 82 or 83, IBM came out with a home version of their IBM PC, which had come out in 1981. That was the first home computer that you could get that is sort of a direct ancestor of machines that we even have today. They still share a number of similarities from even that machine back that far. Anyways, long and short of the story, it's a very long story. The IBM PC Junior was released, and it deviated from the industry standard architecture that IBM was doing with their IBM PC and their XT and their AT, and going forward from there up until the PS2 line. They created this home computer that not only had the regular video output. No, sorry, it wasn't VGA, it was CGA. You're kind of going to have to know a lot of the old-timey hardware to kind of know what I'm talking about, but it'll relate, you'll see. Anyways, long and short of that was it was a slimmed down, slowed down computer, and it not only had the CGA output but also a composite video out, something that you actually could get on the IBM PC if you had a CGA card, but this was built right into the unit. It had a wireless keyboard. It was infrared. You put AA batteries in it. They also, of course, sold a cable, and we had the cable. It came with one diskette drive and no hard drive. Diskette, like floppy disks, remember those? Yeah, you remember them blue ones or black ones or different color ones that had the metal shutter? These didn't have that kind. Those were the 3.5-inch discs. This had 5 1/4. 5 1/4-inch discs were the standard at the time, and that's what it used. So it had a one single floppy drive, 5 1/4-inch, 360 kilobytes, and that was all the storage you had. As far as RAM, you had a 16K variant of the machine and a 128K variant of the machine. We're talking kilobytes of RAM, not megabytes, not gigabytes of RAM, kilobytes of RAM. You could have up to a maximum of 640 kilobytes of RAM, but that system didn't actually support it directly. The processor was an Intel 8088 8-bit processor, and it ran at 4.77 megahertz. It was slowed down by a number of factors due to the cheapening of the machine, so you didn't quite get that. It did have an enhanced sound chip of some kind that was similar to the Tandy sound that the Tandy 1000 computers had at the time, or Tandy kind of used the same chip and made a better IBM PC Junior, but we had the true blue IBM. That machine also could have an internal modem. We did not have that option, but you could hook one up externally. Instead of putting cards in the machine like a video card or anything like that, it had something called sidecars. And the sidecars were just that, an entire unit that would smack onto the side of the machine, and it would grow the machine outwards like that. So that's what we had. We had the IBM PC Junior monitor and an IBM Pro Printer dot matrix printer that is actually still around today. Actually, all of the equipment is still around today, as a matter of fact. That was IBM quality. Even though it was a slowed down, slimmed down machine that didn't do well in the market because of the extended price that they still wanted for it compared to other machines that were out there like the Apple IIs and the Commodore 64 and stuff like that. This thing was priced well out of that kind of ballpark, and it was very, very costly. But of course, my dad, being as cheap as he is, isn't going to pay full price for that, nor would he accept a slowed down machine unless, of course, that machine is at a really good price. And being that he worked for IBM and IBM had plenty of stock of these machines that didn't sell, they were offered at very steep discounts. I vaguely seem to remember he said he paid $400 for the machine back in 83 or 84 in December, whenever it was. The printer was $400 by itself, and I guess there was some sort of discount on that, but that, you know, again, these machines are still around today. That kind of price was unheard of. I don't remember what the asking price of the machine was, maybe like $12.99. That was a fortune still back in the early 80s like that. But the machine was crippled because it didn't follow all the same architecture in that. We ran that machine from 83, 84. In fact, I remember you had to get a sidecar for power, additional power, so you could add an additional memory sidecar to it. And it did not have what we used before USB ports to hook up printers, a parallel port, but they sold a sidecar for that. So we had a power, memory, and parallel port sidecar for this machine. It also had a cartridge port. We only ever had cartridge basic. The machine actually had it built in, but cartridge basic gave you some extended functions in that took better advantage of the IBM PC Junior. I cut my teeth on this machine. I was about 4 or 5 years old at the time. This was a turning point in my life because after playing with this machine and seeing what it could do, that told me what I wanted to do in life, and that was something with computers, which of course I ended up being a computer technician later in life. Well, anyways, we used the hell out of this machine. And what did my sister and I do? We played games on it. What else would you do? You know. So we did that, and it was as good as it got. There were software stores, as a matter of fact, that you could rent software for your computer. They went out of business because of copyright laws and stuff like that later on. You would take the stuff home, it came on diskettes, and you could copy the diskettes and then keep the program. You weren't supposed to. There was a campaign against that, but it didn't stop anyone. And then they came out with something called copy protection on certain disks, but then of course there was a program that you could get that would circumvent that in most cases. And we had said programs, so we had a lot of copy protected stuff as well. And then they even went so far with some of these games as to have you look something up in the manual for it. So my dad would rent the software over the weekend, take it to work with him. He had access to a copier, and he would copy the manual. So now we had a paper copy of the manual. You'd flip through and find the fifth word on page 17 and type that in, and that would let you in the game. And others had a code wheel I remember a game called Pipe Dream, you may recall, on other platforms, and that had a code wheel that had pipes in different shapes and stuff, and you had to get the right pattern of them based on what it told you on the screen. You had to look it up and spin these wheels on the code wheel to get just the right one. And my dad took a little razor blade and he cut out little windows so you'd get the right one. It was pretty involved, and that, but he duplicated it, and we had that game as well, along with a host of others. But my favorite were a lot of the really, really old shoot 'em up type games and stuff like that. Not going to really get into that, but we used that machine. We also used it in school for word processing. Remember, again, this had no hard drive at all, so everything was stored on these 5 1/4 inch floppies. It soon became apparent that this machine was crippled way too far and needed a lot of upgrades. And you did upgrades in those days. Now, in modern times, if you built your own PC, you might not be able to afford the fastest processor that your motherboard would support, but you could say, well, I'll get this one for now and deal with that, see how it is, and then if I really need the extra speed, I can upgrade later. And then you take out your processor, put in the new one, provided your board supports it, and now the machine is faster. Or you could add more memory by just buying little, DIMMs to put in. What do they have, DDR5 now? I don't even know. Memory chips that you could put in the machine. This didn't have any of that. That wasn't a standard thing yet. This had little tiny chips that looked like bugs. They were, about yay big, and they had, 16 legs coming out of them, 8 on each side, and each one was either soldered to a circuit board or had a socket. And the machine had 128K, and then you could add a memory sidecar of 256K, which would give you 384. And then if you wanted more, you had to take the sidecar off, replace all of those little memory chips that are on there, either socketed or actually soldering them to the board, add a number of bodge wires that connected one trace to another on the board in that, and you could max the system out to 640 kilobytes of memory. And my dad did that. He took the machine apart, soldered wires and soldered stuff in and that, and we made the machine have 640K. I remember after my dad did that, my sister said, I want to go on the computer. And this was in the time where you didn't leave your computer on all the time. And even today, some people don't. There was no sleep mode or anything like that. So when you were done using the computer, you turned it off like a lamp in your bedroom when you're going to go to sleep. You just turn it off, period. It's just off. So that's what you did. And when we turned it on, it would do the memory count in the beginning for the power on self-test. And I said to my sister, oh, look, you got to see this. And I said, remember how it only went to like 128? Now it goes up to 640. And she's like, what good is that? I said, well, it's better. It helps the machine run like bigger programs and stuff, which was actually correct. And she said, but it takes so much longer for it to count up to that. I said, well, that's how it is. And yeah, it sure was. That's what you did. We ran that machine. We used it for word processing as well. Like I said, I used that a lot over the years. It was mainly games in the beginning. And like I said, it sparked my interest because there was a particular game that you would just put in the machine, put in the floppy drive, turn it on, it would do its memory count, and then it would boot right up off this disk, and here's the game you wanted. But other ones didn't work that way. You'd put that disk in and try that, and it would give you an error that said, non-system disk or disk error, replace disk and strike any key. And you could strike any key all you want, and you could replace it with another game like that, and it would tell you the same thing because it was not a bootable disk. We all know what booting a computer is nowadays. Well, that has to be written to the machine. Now, this is all hidden behind Windows and that on the Windows side of stuff, and Mac is just, you're just fucked in the head for owning one. But besides all of that, you had to format and put a system copy on the disk so it would boot up. And for those games that didn't automatically boot, you would have to boot up off a disk called DOS, Disk Operating System. You may have heard that term. And it had a command line. There was no mouse, there was no graphical user interface or any of this shit that we have today. No, you had to know what to type in. If you didn't know what to type in, you could type dir for directory, and it would show you the files on the disk, and you could run BAT files, exe files, or COM files, COM. Those are the only ones that would run because those were executable, or in the case of a BAT or batch file, would run other executables on that disk and give them parameters and tell them how to load and stuff like that. So you had to know what you were doing. And you had a book. If you got the machine, set it up, turned it on, there was no welcome to Windows or, hi, I'm your new Mac, like, OMG, do you have an iPhone? There was none of this crap. You sat down, and if you didn't have a disk in it, it would go to basic, and you were expected to start typing your own program. You couldn't save it. You could. It had something called cassette. If you had a cassette drive, we didn't. But if you had a cassette drive, you could actually save it to a cassette tape. Yeah, like an audio cassette, one of them. This is pretty primitive stuff. We ran this machine. I remember using it. All right, nobody died. That's good. We used the hell out of this machine. I remember using it extensively when I was like 12 or 13 years old. I wrote a few programs myself, and it sparked my interest, like I said, because with those games where you had to type in the executable for it to run, I asked my dad, I said, well, how come, you know, this game you can put right in and it just goes, and this one you got to boot up DOS first and then swap the disk and change it out for that? And he told me the reason, and I became intrigued. And it went on from there. And then with programs, we had a lot of programs that were written in BASIC, and many times you could load the program but not run it, and you could list it or get a listing of the actual quote-unquote code that made it work. And then you would have to sit there and figure out what all of these different words and phrases and arguments and stuff like that did. And there was a manual you could sit down and read, and I did. I looked up in the manual and I found certain, like, quote-unquote code words in BASIC where you could do the word print, and you could follow it by a numeric operation. You could do print 5 plus 4, and if you type that in, the computer would just say 9. Simple like that. Or you could write a program and have it do that inside of the program. You could prompt the user to enter the first digit and then enter the second digit and then add it up. Or you could ask them for the operation and make your own calculator. And if you wanted to put text on the screen, you would hit print, put a quotation mark, and then type in what you wanted. And when you ran the program, it would appear on the machine, on the screen. And that's it. You had to sit down with a book and read. Like I said, if you had no disk and you just turned the machine on, it would sit there and you were expected to start writing a program. And there were many people that sat there with the hum of the machine running, with the book, reading the book, figuring out stuff. Oh, so if I type that, it should do that. Oh, wow, it works. Okay, cool. And I learned. And I learned more and more and more, and by the time I was like 12, 13, I had written a very extensive programs, in fact 2 of them, one of which I still used on the old computers up until you didn't use that kind anymore. You know, when Windows and that took over and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, we used the hell out of this thing. I used it extensively in junior high school because for homework assignments and that, they wanted you to do that. And I said, well, I'm not going to sit there with a fucking pen and paper and write all this out because A, my handwriting is shit, and B, my hand would cramp up. And back in the day, I had, in fact, you could still kind of see it, what they call a writing bump right there. There's kind of a circular, it's like a callus. And it grew pretty big over the years, depending on what grade I was in and how much written work we had to do. And I hated it. It was painful, and it was just, that's what you had. That's what we did. Nowadays, kids have laptops and shit, and that, you know, this stuff didn't exist for an old fart like me. So we wrote it down. But like I said, my handwriting was shit, so I would do it on the computer and type it. And in a science class I had in 7th grade, I think it was, yeah. In 7th grade, I would type the answers to my homework out. And you'd have to put a heading on the top and the whole thing, so I had all that. And I would type all that in. And I would do it up nice. And I had access at the time to colored paper. You had blue sheets of paper, green, yellow, sort of a orangey, all kinds of different colors of paper in that were around. We saw on like flyers around school, and I was able to get some from the school. As a matter of fact, they gave me like, you know, that much of a particular color and stuff like that. So I got some, and my dad got some from his job and things like that. So I had all different colored papers and nicer fonts, which took a while to print on a dot matrix printer. So I had all that and programmed in BASIC on that machine and did a lot with that machine. Until I got into the 9th grade. And in the 9th grade, it was already at that point that we had run this machine for about 10 years, roughly 10 years. And this machine was so outpaced and outmoded by machines that had faster processors such as a 286, a 386, and maybe even an early 486 at that point in time. And they had this magical thing called a hard drive where you didn't have to worry about booting up off a DOS disk or anything like that. No. You would turn the machine on and it would boot itself, and then you could get a menu listing all of your programs, all of your games, all of that stuff, and just hit a letter on the keyboard or click on it with a mouse if you had that. We didn't have a mouse. Actually, we did, but it wasn't of that much use on a machine that old. But they were around, we had it, and in certain circumstances it was useful. Oh, we also had a joystick, 2 joysticks for it, that were actual IBM branded ones as well. They were a rebadge of some other one, I think made by Kraft, if I'm not mistaken. Not Kraft Food Company, but Kraft, another Kraft. I think spelled the same way, if I'm not mistaken. They were pretty nice because it had auto return, like auto centering, so it would center itself. And you could turn that off. It had 2 little levers on the bottom you'd flip, and then it was free floating and would stay anywhere you'd leave it. Or you could do just a vertical axis floating or just a horizontal axis floating. And I used that for an old game I had called Test Drive, which somehow worked with both the joystick and the keyboard. So what I did was I would disable the auto center on the vertical axis and put it all the way forward. That would mash the gas all the way to the floor, and then I would drive using the keyboard. You'd have to shift gears with some keys using your left hand, and your right hand would steer back and forth. And then you could also brake somehow. I don't remember. It's been way too long. I used it with the keyboard too, but the joystick gave me an edge where it was pedal to the metal the whole time. And you were timed in that game, so you had to get the course completed in a certain amount of time, and it didn't tell you what that was. It would tell you at the end how long it took you to run that course, but it was a fun game. It didn't run well on that machine, but it did what it did. So we had that, and like I said, we ran that for years and years and years. Oh, and one other accessory we had for it was called a koala pad. This was a drawing tablet in the simplest of terms. It had a big black square and 2 buttons on it, and you had a stylus, and you would draw on that, and what you drew would show up on the screen. It was low resolution, but it was there and you could use it, and we used that program called Koala Painter quite a bit as kids. It had some pretty interesting features for back in the day. So we had that. Oh, and another upgrade, 2 other upgrades my dad did. There was some way to speed up the processor. There were actually 2 ways. One was to replace the 8088 processor with an NEC. It was either a V20 or V30. I forget exactly which one went with the 8088 or the 8086. Long story on that, but anyways, it was possible to do that, so we did upgrade to the NEC chip, which was marginally faster, like 10%, but you could also replace the crystal in the machine and have it oscillate faster. So instead of oscillating at 4.77 megahertz, you could have it oscillate at 8 megahertz. There were actually ways to push that a little farther, but the machine was unstable at higher clock speeds than that, and certain games had to run at the slower speed. So there was a toggle switch on the front of the machine that we had later on machines called the turbo button, if you remember those. And you had turbo, and the opposite of turbo is deturbo. D-E-T-U-R-B-O, deturbo was the opposite of turbo. So if you have a car that doesn't have a turbocharger, you could say it's deturboed. Anyway, that was that. It got to the point where I was in high school, and I had over the years been begging and pleading and begging and pleading with my dad to get another, maybe somebody did die, I don't know, to get another computer because this one was just too old, and some of these programs, games and stuff that he would get from the software store just wouldn't run anymore. The machine was just too slow, even with the speed up on it. It just couldn't handle it. Or it really required a hard drive, and we didn't have that. So I was begging and pleading and begging and pleading, and my dad's like, no way, no how. This computer is good for you the rest of your life, kind of thing. And he knew what was out there, but he wasn't on the PC side of things. Like I said, he worked for IBM, and they were still in the PC business. And they had faster machines, but they were all selling, I guess, reasonably well enough until they decided to exit the home PC market in the late 90s, I guess it was, somewhere in there, or maybe early 2000s. But they still had their IBM ThinkPads around for a while until they decided to sell that off to Lenovo. But it was a hell of a machine, and we also added an additional 5.25-inch floppy drive and an additional 3.5-inch floppy drive, which had 720 kilobytes of storage, twice the capacity of the 360K disks. So we would boot up off the main 360K 5.25-inch drive of the machine, and then go to drive C, which was not a hard drive. It was that 3.5-inch drive, because B was the second 5.25-inch drive. But C had a lot more storage and maybe was a little bit faster in accessing the disk. It was a wonderful time, and like I said, I cut my teeth on that, but that machine was outdated when we got it. And like I said, with the likes of people having machines that had megabytes of memory and Windows 3.1, and it used a mouse and all kinds of crazy stuff like that, and a hard drive where it would just boot up and you didn't have to do that. I didn't have any of those luxuries at all. None whatsoever. But my dad absolutely, blatantly fucking refused. Until finally it happened. Now this video has gone on for a half hour, it looks like, at this point. So we're going to call this part 1, and we'll come back with part 2. This is going to be a long series, but it's exceptionally interesting to me. I hope it is for you, because like I said, this steered me in the right direction for the rest of my life. And here I am as an old fart, retired now, after working as a computer technician. But hey, you know, for many years, this steered me in the direction I wanted to go in life. So it is absolutely paramount to my success in life as well. All from this thing called the home computer, which nobody ever dreamed of having back in the 70s, really. But then it happened, and it happened to me. But like I said, that machine was too outdated. Anyways, we're going to come back with part 2 next time on Old War Stories with Uncle Jay. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure you click like, make sure you click subscribe, and take care. We'll see you next time. And in part 2, I'll tell you about the next machine I got. Bye-bye.